Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts or story in the comments, and subscribe to our latest stories. Before I start, tell me where you are watching me from. I wonder which cities and towns will join me in this memory that will follow me for years. He said, "It's complicated," and at the time, I believed him. Maybe because I wanted to. Maybe because it was easier to believe that than face the truth that something inside me had already begun to change. It was early autumn when it started. The kind of season that makes everything feel like it's shifting, the light, the air, even people's moods. I'd just finished work and was walking home through Maple Street, where the trees were starting to turn into a soft flame of color. The wind carried that faint smell of wood smoke and rain. I remember thinking how beautiful everything looked, even though my life, at that moment, felt anything but. I met Daniel 3 months earlier at a community event. He was the kind of man who didn't speak loudly, yet somehow everyone noticed when he entered a room. Maybe it was the way he carried himself, or the fact that when he looked at you, it felt like he was listening with his whole being. He was kind, older than me by a few years, and calm in ways that drew me in. After years of feeling invisible, that attention felt like warmth after a long winter. We started meeting for coffee after Sunday mornings. It wasn't planned, it just happened. First at the cafe on the corner, then on park benches, and later, at the library steps. He'd tell me about his work restoring old houses, about how he loved bringing something broken back to life. I told him about my late husband, about how the silence in my house sometimes felt heavier than the furniture itself. We never planned anything, but those talks became my quiet ritual. Until one afternoon, I noticed a small hesitation in his words, something unspoken, something he didn't want to tell me. That's when he said it. "It's complicated." I remember that moment clearly. The cafe was almost empty, the sound of soft jazz playing low in the background. The steam from my tea curled into the air like a slow sigh. He looked down at his hands, and I saw how tense they were, his fingers pressing into each other like he was holding something back. "What's complicated?" I asked, trying to sound casual, though my heart was beating faster. He gave that half smile, the kind people give when they don't want to say too much. "Life," he said. "It's not as simple as it used to be." That was all. Just that. I didn't push. I wanted to, but something about the way he looked at me, like he was carrying a story that wasn't ready to be told, made me stop. So instead, I nodded and changed the subject. But from that day on, I started to notice things. Small things. He'd avoid certain questions. Sometimes, when his phone buzzed, he'd silence it quickly. And once, when I mentioned seeing him with someone outside the hardware store, he said it was just a friend. Still, I stayed. Because he was kind. Because when he spoke, I felt calm. Because sometimes, being seen even halfway is enough to make you ignore what's right in front of you. One evening, I decided to walk home a different way, past the neighborhood where Daniel said he lived. It wasn't planned, I just wanted to see the old houses he'd talked about. The ones with big porches and ivy climbing up the walls. I wasn't looking for anything. At least, that's what I told myself. The streetlights had just come on, washing everything in a soft gold. I found the house by chance, number 42. The porch light was on, and I recognized his truck in the driveway. I was about to keep walking when I saw her. A woman, maybe around my age, stepped out onto the porch holding a small dog. She called out, "Dinner's ready." And then Daniel appeared in the doorway. He smiled at her, softly, naturally, the way he smiled at me. I froze. For a moment, I couldn't move. The wind felt colder, the air heavier. I didn't see them touch, but I didn't need to. I understood. I walked home that night slower than usual, every step echoing with questions I couldn't ask. "It's complicated." That's what he'd said. And now, I began to understand what he might have meant. When I got home, I didn't cry. I made tea, turned off the lights, and sat by the window watching the rain start to fall. The sound was soft, almost forgiving. Maybe that's why I didn't feel anger, just a strange quiet acceptance. Because maybe, for him, it was complicated. Maybe for me too, but in that stillness, I realized something. For the first time in years, I'd allowed myself to feel again. To hope. To care. And even if it ended differently than I imagined, maybe that was still something worth remembering. That night, I wrote in my journal, "Sometimes, people come into your life not to stay, but to remind you that you're still alive." I didn't know it then, but that was just the beginning. The next time I saw Daniel, everything changed. The next time I saw Daniel, it was raining. Not the soft kind that brushes against windows like a whisper, but the kind that soaks through clothes, leaving everything heavy and real. I'd gone to the small bookstore near downtown to escape the storm, clutching an umbrella that had already lost the battle. The air inside was warm, filled with the smell of paper and old wood, and then, there he was. Standing by the window, looking at a shelf of travel books, as if nothing had happened. For a moment, I thought about leaving before he noticed me. But he turned, and our eyes met. That quiet recognition between us, it stopped me in place. He smiled, hesitant, almost like he wasn't sure he was allowed to. "Hey," he said softly, as if we'd just seen each other yesterday, as if nothing had changed. "Hey," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. He gestured to the empty chair beside him. "You still drink that jasmine tea?" I nodded, and before I knew it, we were sitting across from each other at the tiny table in the corner, 2 cups steaming between us. The silence stretched, not uncomfortable, but full, like both of us were waiting for the other to say what needed to be said. Finally, I spoke. "You could have told me." He exhaled, eyes dropping to the cup in his hands. "I wanted to," he said. "I just didn't know how." There was no anger in his voice, only a kind of tired honesty. I watched him carefully, his shoulders slightly slumped, his eyes darker than I remembered. "She's my wife," he said finally. "We've been distant for years. We live in the same house, but it hasn't felt like home for a long time." I didn't say anything. The words sank into me slowly, heavy but not surprising. "I thought I could just talk to someone," he went on, "someone who wouldn't judge me. You were that person." And then it became something more, something I didn't expect. The rain outside pressed harder against the glass, like it was trying to listen. "I didn't plan any of this," he said quietly. "I didn't mean to hurt you." For a moment, all I could think about was how fragile everything felt, our connection, the truth, the space between us. I looked at him and saw the man who had listened to me when I spoke about my loneliness, the man who made me laugh when I didn't think I could. But now, there was another truth he wasn't mine to hold. "I cared about you," I said, my voice softer now. "Maybe more than I should have." "I know," he said. "And I cared too." The simplicity of his words hurt more than I expected. There was no drama in them, no excuses, just truth. And somehow, that made it harder. We sat there for a while, saying nothing. The shopkeeper swept the floor, the clock ticked, and outside, the rain began to fade into a mist. It felt like the whole world was slowing down, waiting for me to decide what came next. "I don't hate you," I said finally. "But I can't be part of something that hurts someone else." "Not anymore." He nodded, looking down. "I understand." And maybe he did. Maybe he really did. When I left the bookstore, the air smelled fresh, like the world had been washed clean. I walked home under the pale grey sky, the puddles reflecting pieces of light from the street lamps. I felt lighter and heavier all at once. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window again, watching the city lights flicker like quiet thoughts. I thought about how easy it is to get lost in someone's kindness, especially when you've been lonely for too long. But I also thought about something deeper, that maybe Daniel had reminded me of what I needed to find in myself, the courage to start over, to open my heart without losing myself in someone else's shadow. A week later, he sent me a letter. Handwritten, simple, honest. He wrote about how meeting me had made him see what he'd lost, not just in his marriage, but in himself. He said he was trying to fix things, to be better, not for anyone else, but for the man he wanted to be. I read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in my drawer. Not because I wanted to forget, but because I wanted to remember that connection can exist without possession, that love doesn't always mean holding on. Sometimes it means letting go with grace. And even though it hurt, I knew that moment, sitting in that bookstore with the rain tapping on the window, was the quiet beginning of something new inside me, something I wasn't ready to name yet, but I could feel it growing. Days turned into weeks, and the rhythm of my life began to shift in ways I hadn't expected. I continued my morning walks through the park, the crisp air brushing my cheeks, leaves crunching softly beneath my feet. But now, I found myself noticing details I had previously ignored, the way sunlight caught on the edge of a fountain, the subtle laughter of children playing, the quiet nods of neighbors I'd never spoken to. Life felt fuller somehow, even with the ache of absence lingering in the corners of my heart. Then one evening, Daniel called. Not a casual text or a fleeting voicemail, an actual phone call. I remember the moment vividly. I was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner, when my phone rang. The screen lit up with his name, and for a second, my hands froze. I took a deep breath and answered, "Hello?" I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Hi," he replied softly. "Do you have time to talk?" "Of course," I said, setting down the knife and leaning against the counter. There was a pause. I wanted to apologize," he began. "Not just for before, but for all of it. For the confusion, for putting you in the middle of my life while I figured out my own." His voice had that familiar calm, but there was also a rawness I hadn't heard before, an honesty that made me ache in the best possible way. "I've been thinking a lot about us," he continued, "about the way I've treated you, the way I've hidden pieces of my life. And I realized something. I don't want to hide anymore. I want you to know everything. If you still want to, I mean." I felt my heart tighten, the familiar tension of longing mixed with caution. "Everything?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," he said. "Every part that matters. Every truth you deserve." That night, we met at a small diner that had been around since forever, the kind with red vinyl booths and the smell of coffee and pancakes lingering in the air. It was quiet when we arrived, just the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional clatter of dishes. I slid into the booth across from him, and we ordered tea, letting the initial silence stretch comfortably between us. "Where do I even start?" I asked, looking at him with a mixture of curiosity and caution. He smiled, that same gentle smile, and for the first time, I saw him completely unguarded. "At the beginning," he said. "But not the beginning with you. The beginning of me, the parts I've kept to myself for too long." He told me about his marriage, not in a bitter way, but in a way that revealed his humanity. The slow drift apart, the unspoken resentments, the quiet nights filled with regret and reflection. He told me about his fears, the weight of responsibility, and the small victories he held onto like lifelines. And then he told me about us. How our conversations, our walks, our coffee dates, had started to mean more than he anticipated. How he had begun to see me not as a distraction from his life, but as someone who made him want to be better, someone who reminded him of joy and hope. I listened, letting his words wash over me, and for the first time, I understood the complexity he had spoken of. Life wasn't simple. It wasn't black and white. But in that small diner, with the smell of syrup and the low hum of conversation around us, I felt a clarity I hadn't felt in years. "I don't know where this will go," he said finally, reaching across the table to rest his hand near mine. "But I want to walk through it with you, if you'll let me. Carefully, honestly, step by step." I looked at him, the man who had stirred emotions I thought I had buried, and I realized that I didn't want to run from this. I didn't want to retreat into safety. "I'll walk with you," I said, my voice steady, though my heart raced, and just like that, a door opened. Not a grand, dramatic door, but a small one, just wide enough to let possibility in. That night, I walked home under the streetlights, feeling the weight of both the past and the future. And for the first time in a long time, I felt the strange thrill of hope, the kind that comes not from certainty, but from the courage to face life as it is, messy and complicated, yet beautiful. I went to bed that night with a quiet smile, the city outside my window still buzzing, still alive. And I knew, deep down, that whatever happened next, I had taken the first true step toward understanding, connection, and perhaps, a new chapter of my own life. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't neat. But it was real, and sometimes, that's exactly what we need. The weeks that followed were quiet, yet full in a way I hadn't anticipated. Daniel and I didn't rush. There were no dramatic declarations or rushed decisions, just small, deliberate steps that built a bridge between our lives. We met at bookstores, walked through the park, and sometimes, just sat together in silence over tea. And with each meeting, I realized something profound. Connection isn't always about grand gestures. Often, it's about presence, honesty, and shared moments that feel sacred simply because they exist. One late afternoon, we found ourselves at a small botanical garden on the outskirts of town. The autumn sun filtered through the amber leaves, casting delicate shadows across the stone pathways. The air smelled faintly of damp earth and fallen leaves, and the world felt suspended in time. We walked side by side, not holding hands, but close enough that the brush of our shoulders sent small sparks of recognition through me. "I think life teaches us in pieces," Daniel said softly, breaking the comfortable silence. Sometimes, we get the lessons we need slowly, so we actually see them. I looked at him, curious. And what lesson did you get? He smiled, eyes warm but reflective. That truth matters more than comfort. That honesty, even when it hurts, is a kind of gift. And that connection, real connection, is worth waiting for, even when it's complicated. I nodded, understanding him more than I could put into words. It wasn't just about him, or about us, it was about learning to navigate life's complexities with courage and respect. We stopped at a small wooden bench overlooking a pond, the water reflecting the fiery hues of the trees. A family of ducks glided silently across the surface, and for a moment, everything felt suspended, like the world had narrowed to this quiet corner of the garden and the soft presence of each other. I've been afraid, I admitted quietly. Afraid that caring for someone like you would lead to heartbreak. Afraid that I'd lose myself in your complications. And yet here you are, he said, his voice steady. Not running, not turning away. That matters more than you know. I smiled faintly, letting the truth settle between us. It matters more than I realized too. Being honest about what we feel, even with the risk, it feels alive. And it did. In the golden light of that late afternoon, surrounded by the quiet beauty of the garden, I felt alive in a way I hadn't for years. The past, the mistakes, the heartbreak, the silence hadn't disappeared, but they had softened. They were no longer chains but guides, reminders of what I valued, what I could endure, and what I could hope for. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of rose and violet, we stood together, watching the world transform in the fading light. There was no promise of tomorrow, no assurance that our lives would remain simple or uncomplicated. But there was presence, and honesty, and the fragile, powerful magic of human connection. I'm glad you stayed, Daniel said finally, his hand brushing lightly against mine, not as a claim, but as a gesture of trust. Me too, I said, smiling. Me too. And as we walked back through the winding paths, the air crisp and fragrant with autumn, I understood something essential. Life may be complicated, but that doesn't make it any less beautiful. Sometimes, it's the very complications, the hidden stories and unspoken truths, that teach us the depth of our capacity to feel, to connect, and to grow. I didn't know what the future held for us, but I knew I would carry this chapter with me, this season of discovery, honesty, and quiet courage. And that was enough, because sometimes, the most profound love isn't about possession or certainty. It's about understanding, patience, and the willingness to walk side by side, even when the path is winding and the destination uncertain. And as I finally returned home that evening, the city lights shimmering through the window, I felt a gentle peace settle in my heart. For the first time in a long while, I knew that I was not just surviving life, I was truly living it.